completely exceptional. And what I mean by exceptional, to give you an example, is that between 2008 and 2012, 74% of the foreign trips reported as gifts by the legislature of Illinois were to the Republic of Turkey. These trips, funded by the government, these trips, and also by these organizations, these trips established a relationship between the Gulenists and the key political networks in the United States, and in this case of the Niagara Foundation in the Midwest, that were to serve as the building blocks for the schools. Because one of the first coups, to use that term for Mr. Gulen, was to appoint the Speaker of the Illinois House, Mr. Madigan, as a key representative and a key beneficiary of the activities of the Niagara Foundation. Madigan ended up traveling on 4 separate occasions. Madigan also set up, in an extraordinary activity, set up his own method in Illinois for chartering schools that allowed the Gulenists to set up a charter organization with the inexperienced staff that they would normally basically use in most of their endeavors. Because once Gulen set up the cultural organization and used the cultural organization to promote relationships with key politicians and journalists, because I'll tell you, the Niagara Foundation constantly honored the Chicago Tribune and constantly got warm coverage from the Chicago Tribune, and also established awards that went to the FBI and other critical organizations to them in the Midwest. So once they had the political connections, they apply for the charters. And now that's step 2. Step 3 is they use the charters to hire education management organizations, which are for-profit organizations, which are the lifeblood of Gulen funding. These for-profits make the money that Gulen has used to distribute to his minions in the United States and abroad. Then these EMOs, at a 4th step, rack up fees and give rigged contracts to related parties. To give you an example, Kamal Aksuz in Texas was a teacher at a school for the Harmony branch of the charters. Within months of leaving Harmony, he sets up a construction company. Within months of setting up a construction company, he receives a multi-million-dollar tender for the construction of a Gulen school. Our first book outlined dozens of these scams involving everything from school chairs to school uniforms to school foods to school construction. The one thing Fethullah Gulen's people deserve a PhD in is ripping off the American taxpayer, because they went at it scientifically. And that is something that's important to understand. The level of education in these schools is often very seriously undermined by 2 things. One, the fact that the teachers are often unqualified Turkish immigrants who have been illegally imported into the United States using the H-1B visa program. The Gulen schools represent the single largest violation on a systemic level of US immigration laws. If you want to understand the depth of the problem, there have been some organizations that have called this the largest criminal network for the importation of illegals ever to be established. Because once these poor Turkish citizens are brought to the United States, not only are they forced to teach in a language some of them are barely fluent in, but they're forced to tithe their income to the organization, sometimes to the rate of 30 or 40%. And that goes to the secret coffers of the organization, which are organized in cash payments through a network of imams who are completely non-transparent and work in conjunction with the EMOs, the for-profit aspect of this. And then lastly, number 5, the plan resuscitates itself by taking the proceeds and putting money back into cultural organizations and then sending certain of the monies offshore. Now I can tell you some shockingly good news. As a result of the work of many organizations in the United States, and I would include our firm among them, the Department of Education last week issued new budget regulations to deal with charter schools. And it was as if the Department of Education had read Empire of Deceit, because what they have done is made it extremely difficult for for-profit management companies, the EMOs we've spoken about, to continue to exist without a tremendous level of transparency. And these changes in the regulations are also important because the real estate contracts that the Gulen organization has established, which have involved multi-layered Ponzi schemes and frauds in respect to elevating the cost of construction, these are also going to be put under specific microscopic inspection. To show you how the real estate scam works, we found the reconstruction of a gym in Illinois to go from $2 million to $40 million under Gulenist accounting magic. I mean, truly, the scope of the frauds we outlined in both volume 1 and volume 2 now of our work is almost beyond imagination. So when we talk about political influence, it is ongoing. It doesn't stop. An example is Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, and we've included the audit in the appendix of our book, an auditor actually found that taxpayer money in Oklahoma was being sent illegally out of state to Texas. Secondly, the auditor found that the Gulen schools had engaged in improper transfer of profits between two of the same entities within the organization. When that fraud was uncovered by the auditors, however, the Gulenists were able to hire the former Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma to represent them. Such had been their influence in Oklahoma in terms of cultivating the political contacts. And very often, these relationships become a family affair. In Illinois, with the Madigans, not only was the Speaker of the House, Madigan, saluted and made part of the Gulen plan, but his stepdaughter, who became Attorney General, was also honored by the Niagara Foundation. And as the book now notes, Speaker Madigan was indicted. He was indicted for the corrupt use of his office. And this is another good thing about the Gulenists. They do tend to work with people that at some level or another run into legal or political problems. Another problem for Gulen is a man named Henry Cuellar, a Texas congressman. He worked with Kemal Aksus, worked with the front companies of Aksus. He hired the son of Aksus 6 months after Aksus was sentenced for illegally lying to Congress and deceiving Congress. As a result of that, in part, Cuellar's own offices were raided by the FBI recently. Another example of the Gulenists going a step too far. So the situation in the United States of their use of political influence and spokespersons has gone to extreme lengths. One of the most important voices for Fethullah Gulen in the United States is a former basketball player named Enes Kanter. Enes Kanter, you can see at the right, is a basketball player, a human rights activist, self-appointed, a critic of Turkey, but a man whose Gulenist credentials never seem to come out in the American press. He lectures the Republican Party. He has his own meetings in Congress. And no one in the Republican Party has taken the time to ask this foreign policy genius about his relationship to the Gulen organization. So we decided to do a little digging. After he spoke at Congress, after he was on Fox News, after he was on CNN, after he was on every major network without mentioning his Gulenist relationships. And after we did some digging, we found out something very interesting. His new foundation, the Enes Kanter Freedom Foundation, occupies the same address as a company called Arlington Strategic Supplies and Manufacturing. And Arlington is very important. It's very important because it is the American arm, or it was delisted a few months ago. It was the American arm of a company called Milcor. And Milcor is a military and arms manufacturer. And it is owned by a Gulenist named Vuslat Bayoglu. So Arlington had, as part of its operation, 2 former members of the charter school sorority, Kemal Aksus and Furkan Koser. And Furkan Koser is no ordinary Gulenist. He was the founder of the first Gulen charters in the United States. So we have a series of questions for Enes Kanter, the self-styled human rights activist. Firstly, what is his connection to Arlington Strategic Supplies? Secondly, to what extent, since he is an avowed Gulenist, he changed his name allegedly to Gulen. We're not sure if that ever happened. He disavowed his family, and he posted extraordinary numbers of photos with leading American politicians, none of whom asked him the question about his relationship with Gulen, about Gulen's relationship to the coup. And in addition, we find that Enes Kanter's financial guru is none other than Mevlut Chinar, another Gulenist directly connected to the organization, formerly an executive director of Niagara Foundation. So this man who is parading as a human rights figure has a lot to explain in terms of his relationship to Gulen, in terms of the very nature of the human rights he is attempting to defend. Because at the end of the day, you cannot be a cult member and be an advocate for human rights. Because the very nature of this cult is to deny essential freedoms to non-believers. It violates every precept that it publicly espouses in terms of its interdenominational faith excursions that it engages with throughout the United States. We have interviewed over 150 Gulenists who talk of a massive level of anti-Semitism that goes on within the Gulen organization. The same people who go out there and attempt to speak at churches and synagogues in the United States. These same people believe they have such impunity that they can establish an arms company that exports arms, and I'm talking about grenade launchers. They export arms throughout Africa. We believe they may even be ending up in Syria. And it's staffed by key members of the Gulen Charter School organization. And this gets us to an issue that comes up again and again with our team, which is, and this just happened, in November of 2020, Concept Schools settled after a 6-year investigation by the FBI, settled a claim under the False Claims Act for $4.5 million, which was a tiny fraction of the money they stole. Kemal Aksus, after pleading guilty to devising a scheme to falsify, conceal, and cover up facts from the House of Representatives, and after fleeing to Armenia, and after being extradited, only got 3 months in jail. We have to ask ourselves, what is the level of protection being given to the Gulen schools and the Gulen organization by the United States? Who is covering for Gulen? This is a fundamental question that the Turkish government must ask. Because the numbers don't lie. Their profit, we estimate, at $1 billion over the last decade. And that is a low estimate of what this organization has taken in. If the United States is an ally of Turkey, as we know it is, what are they doing allowing this organization to continue. And I haven't spoken about what our own team has uncovered in respect to what goes on in these schools. Let me give you an example. Our team met with a whistleblowing parent from Florida. This parent witnessed her child being strip searched in a Florida school. She was held against her will with her child in the principal's office. The facts were that the child might have used his cell phone to video something that happened at the school. And the Turkish management of the school, and we should say of these 250 schools, the vast majority has Turkish Gulenist management. The Turkish management engaged in this activity. It was so serious that we called the FBI. We had one of our lawyers fly to Florida, depose the parents, provide the FBI with the deposition. Nothing was done until 2 years later, on January 19th, 2021, Abdulaziz Yaldin was arrested on 2 third-degree felony counts after failing to report suspected child abuse. And I will tell you that this has happened to us on more than one occasion. On a series of occasions, we have heard horror stories about the treatment, particularly of children with learning disabilities. We have also pointed out to members of Congress that Gulen schools are white flight schools. They engage in taking taxpayer money in poorer districts of the United States, keeping the white children who have higher educational scores, and largely excluding blacks and other minorities. These organizations are not consistent with American values. And yet, it was only last week that we saw the first real signs of change in the United States with this budget regulation coming down. We believe that Web of Influence will be incredibly important at educating those in the United States who haven't read the first book as to what the dangers of the Gulen organization are, what the dangers of individuals like Enes Kanter and the rest of his gang are in terms of projecting this false image to the United States of Turkey. And I think it is very important for Turkey to stand up and not allow this to continue one day or 1 month longer. When we talk about what leverage Turkey has, it is far greater today than it was before February 24th. This is a time where FETÖ and the charter school industry that pumps out profits to corrupt American politicians and to provide monies for arms in Africa and the United States, it is time for this impunity with respect to Gulen to end. And we hope that this book, as well as the achievements of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we hope that this will write the final chapter of this legacy. Thank you very much.
Wow. It's absolutely mind-blowing to look and hear in depth into all this information that you and your team have unfolded about the FETÖ terrorist organization. And I can't wait to read more on it in your book, Web of Influence, Empire of Deceit. We do have copies here at this event today, if anyone wants to get their hands on this book as well. I want to continue with a short Q&A session. If anyone here has questions that they would like to forward to Mr. Amsterdam, I'd be delighted to hear them. Can we get a microphone over to? Great.
Hello, my name is Ercan from Bloomberg News. I'd like to ask Mr. Amsterdam, how did you come up with those figures that you just shown us, like the 4 billion, 1 billion, and $30 million? Are they just estimates, or do you have some, especially American documents, American government documents that back them up?
We essentially used the statistics that have been reported publicly. CBS News had done a report in 2016, estimated at 2.2 billion. We extrapolated based on the number of schools and the activity to reach 4 billion, which we actually view as conservative. We have asked under Freedom of Information Act, literally for the numbers on almost all the schools. We weren't provided with any. The nature of Gulen is completely secretive, completely fraudulent. I mean, you can never understand how much they're making because of all the skimming. And when I say all the skimming, I can give you example out of specific example. If you look at our 2015 book with over 1,000 footnotes, we have documented all of the individual scams. The Chicago Gymnasium, the real estate through something called Plan, which allows the purchase of a building for, let's say, $1 million, and then a lease back over 20 years at $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 leases. You can see all of this documented. If we had the time to actually re-engineer the numbers, they would be much larger than this. So we've tried to be extremely conservative based on the public research that CBS had done. And that's something important to understand. I find it fascinating that, you know, in the United States, we registered under FARA right from the get-go. And the Gulenists don't, because they don't have to. They're completely non-transparent. We are completely transparent. I can honestly tell you, in 7 years working for the Turkish government, they have never asked for an advanced copy. They have never revised one aspect of work done solely by Americans and Canadians. Only one cosmetic issue came up where they asked us where we said Gulen to occasionally use FETÖ so Turkish audiences would understand. Other than that, nothing substantive has ever been commented on by our own clients, which is shocking when you consider how Turkey is dealt with in the United States. And you know, shocking as well that so much of the coverage of Turkey fails to deal with FETÖ as a problem, because Americans assume that somehow FETÖ is some sort of political opposition group. The truth, and it's very important to understand, is that FETÖ is a mafia. It is a mafia in the most dangerous sense of the term. Yes, at a certain level, it has an existential security threat, but it is a mafia in how it steals money from the poorest of the poor, which is why the NAACP in California passed a resolution saying, audit these damn schools, because they're stealing money from the poorest of the poor, from the weakest of the weak. And we have seen it time and time again. But I would ask you to please download volume 1, and you'll see all the math there for the real estate scams, the food scams, the teachers tithing, so much of which we can't capture because it's under the table. But our book contains audit reports from Oklahoma that sets out some of the scams. Fulton County, which closed all the schools, does a report that sets out a bunch of the scams. So the public evidence is there.
Is there anyone else that would like to ask a question to Mr. Amsterdam? I'd like to ask one. We've done extensive research on the FETÖ terror organization as TRT World, and we've heard President Erdogan over and over again ask for the extradition of Fethullah Gülen himself. What's the likeliness of that ever happening moving forward, especially now that, you know, in one way or form, US politicians are seeing the spotlight being put on the FETÖ terror organization?
Well, it's funny. I have made it a point for 7 years never to comment on his extradition. And I won't change that because Fethullah Gülen is one man. And I have continued to urge the government to focus on the schools. The schools are $1 billion in his pocket. And when he goes, and contrary to what Enes Kanter says, he will go. When he goes, we will still be left with the schools. And those schools are a cancer on the American system of government. And it is something that is an urgent foreign policy issue for the government of Turkey, particularly since we know that the organization is engaged in the manufacture of weapons of war. You do have to ask yourself how an organization could have its founder of the charter school network engaged as part of an arms company and think it can evade any question. It's a demonstration of their belief in their own impunity. They believe they've bought enough American politicians that nothing can harm them. There is no greater threat to the American system than a foreign-based organization that believes it is so corrupt and so permeable and so weak that their actions of converting taxpayer money into weapons of war can go undetected.
All right, anyone else? Okay, I think that brings us now to the end of this portion of the event. Mr. Amsterdam, it was a pleasure hosting
Thank
you
you so
today
much.
and promoting your book launch. Again, anyone that is interested, I'm sure can get access to this book. We have some copies straight outside the conference room. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.